The morning, Hannah Oakes watched her father's coffin lowered into the hard Texas ground. She understood that everything she had known was ending. Alpine sat nestled in the Chihuahuan Desert, a small town that seemed to exist only because the railroad had decided it should. And now in August of 1885, it was the place where her old life had died along with the only family she had left. The preacher's words drifted past her like tumbleweeds, meaningless sounds that could not comfort the hollow ache spreading through her chest. At 22 years old, she found herself entirely alone in a world that had little patience for women without protection or prospects. Her father had owned a small dry goods store on the main street, but the debts he left behind were larger than any inheritance. The bank would take the building within the month, and Hannah had nowhere to go and no skills beyond keeping ledgers and measuring out flour. She had spent her entire life behind that counter, watching the world through dusty windows, never learning the things that might help her survive out here where the desert met the sky in an endless expanse of brutal beauty. After the funeral, the few townspeople who had attended offered their sympathies with the kind of distance that told her they would not be offering anything more substantial. Mrs. Crowley from the boarding house pressed a handkerchief into her hand. Mr. Peterson from the general store shook his head sadly, but said nothing about employment. Even Reverend Thomas, who had spoken over her father's grave, simply patted her shoulder and moved on to heartier conversations with the men folk. Hannah walked back to the small room behind the store that had been her home, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders like physical hands. The August heat shimmered off the hard, packed earth, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath the heavy black mourning dress. She had perhaps 3 weeks before the bank took possession, 3 weeks to figure out how to survive in a place where survival required skills she had never needed to learn. She was sitting at her father's desk, staring at the columns of debt in his ledger, when someone knocked on the front door. For a moment, she considered not answering, but practicality won over grief. She smoothed her skirts and walked through the store, past the half-empty shelves and the counter where she had spent countless hours of her life. The man on the other side of the door was tall, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly, and there was something in his posture that spoke of respect and genuine concern rather than the distant sympathy she had been receiving all day. "Miss Oakes," he said, his voice low and warm despite the formality, "I am sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man, always fair in his dealings." Hannah nodded, unsure what to say. She did not recognize this man, though there was something vaguely familiar about him, as if perhaps he had been one of the many faces that passed through the store over the years. "My name is Henry Quinn," he continued when she did not speak. "I have a ranch about 10 miles out of town. Your father and I had business dealings from time to time, and I wanted to pay my respects." "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," Hannah managed, her voice sounding strange and hollow even to her own ears. "That is kind of you." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable but determined to continue. "I also wanted to speak with you about a practical matter, if you will forgive the indelicate timing." Something in her chest tightened. Here it was, then, whatever proposition men thought appropriate to make to women alone in the world. She had heard the stories, knew what happened to women without protection, but she lifted her chin and met his eyes steadily, refusing to show fear. "I understand you will be losing the store," Henry said, his gaze direct but not unkind. "And I know that leaves you in a difficult position. I have a large ranch, and I am in need of someone to manage the household. My previous housekeeper returned east to be with her family, and I have been managing poorly on my own for the past 2 months. I am offering you employment, Miss Oakes, Room and board plus wages. Respectable employment. Hannah stared at him, trying to process the unexpected offer. You want me to be your housekeeper? I do. I know you have no references for that kind of work, but your father spoke of you often. He said you were intelligent, hardworking, and competent. Those are the qualities I need. The rest can be learned. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. You do not know me, Mr. Quinn. Why would you offer this? Henry met her eyes steadily. Because your father helped me once when I needed it, and because everyone deserves a chance to build a life. I am not offering charity, Miss Oakes. I genuinely need help, and you need employment. It seems a reasonable arrangement. Hannah felt something loosen in her chest, a small easing of the pressure that had been building since her father took ill 3 weeks ago. This was not security, not really, but it was a possibility, a path forward when she had been staring into darkness. I would need to think about it, she said, though she already knew her answer. What choice did she have? Of course. I will be in town until tomorrow afternoon. You can send word to me at the boarding house. He settled his hat back on his head and nodded to her. Again, my condolences, Miss Oakes. Your father was a good man. She watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the dusty street, and wondered if she was about to make the best or worst decision of her life. That night, Hannah lay awake in the small bed that had been hers since childhood, listening to the familiar sounds of Alpine settling in for the night. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The wind rattled the loose board on the back door that her father had always meant to fix. The building creaked and sighed around her like a living thing preparing to let her go. She thought about Henry Quinn, trying to remember if she had ever seen him in the store. Vague impressions surfaced, a tall man who spoke little but always paid in full, who treated her father with respect and her with distant courtesy. Nothing threatening, nothing untoward. But what did she really know about him? What did she know about life outside this store, outside this town? Fear curled in her stomach, cold and heavy. But beneath the fear was something else, something that might have been excitement if she had allowed herself to feel it. The world beyond these walls was unknown, but perhaps unknown did not have to mean terrible. Perhaps it could mean possibility. In the morning, Hannah put on her second-best dress, the gray one that was somber enough for morning but practical enough for travel, and walked to the boarding house. Mrs. Crowley answered her knock and directed her to the small dining room where Henry Quinn sat drinking coffee and reading a day-old newspaper. He stood when she entered, setting the paper aside. Miss Oakes. I would like to accept your offer, Mr. Quinn, Hannah said without preamble. When would you like me to start? Something that might have been relief crossed his face. I need to return to the ranch today. Would you be able to travel this afternoon? I can arrange for someone to help you pack your belongings and bring them out in a wagon. Hannah thought of the small room behind the store, the few possessions she owned that held any meaning. I do not have much to pack. I can be ready whenever you need me to be. This afternoon, then. I have some business to conclude in town and then we can head out. The ride is about 2 hours. We should reach the ranch before dark. It was only later, after Hannah had packed her few belongings into a single trunk and said goodbye to the empty store, that the full weight of what she was doing settled on her shoulders. She was leaving the only home she had ever known to go live on a ranch with a man she did not know, to do work she had never done. But the alternative was to stay and face the certainty of destitution, and that thought was more terrifying than any unknown. Henry Quinn arrived with a wagon in the early afternoon. He loaded her trunk into the back without comment and helped her up onto the seat with a courtesy that seemed genuine rather than calculated. Then they were rolling out of Alpine, leaving behind the dust and disappointment of her old life. They rode in silence for the first hour, the wagon creaking along the rutted road that led north into the high desert country. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all rocks and scrub and distant mountains purple against the brilliant blue sky. Hannah had never been this far from town, had never seen the world stretch out so endlessly in all directions. "It is different out here," Henry said eventually, breaking the silence. "Harder in some ways, easier in others, but it is honest country. You know where you stand." "How long have you had the ranch?" Hannah asked, grateful for the conversation. Anything was better than sitting with her own anxious thoughts. 5 years. "I bought it from a man who was heading back east. It was in rough shape then, but I have built it up. I run about 300 head of cattle now, have 4 hands who work for me. Good men, reliable. They live in the bunkhouse, so you will not be entirely isolated out here. And your housekeeper, the one who left, Mrs. Martinez. She was with me for 3 years, her daughter back in St. Louis had a baby and she wanted to be there to help. I understood, but it has been difficult managing on my own. I am not much of a cook, and the house has suffered from neglect." Hannah nodded, trying to imagine what she was heading into. She had never run a household, not really. Her father had been a simple man with simple needs, and they had lived in 2 rooms. What did she know about managing a ranch house? As if sensing her anxiety, Henry glanced over at her. "I do not expect perfection, Miss Oakes. I expect effort and honesty. The rest will come with time." "You have a great deal of faith in someone you barely know, Mr. Quinn." "Your father earned that faith. I am extending it to you based on his character. I hope I am not wrong." They fell back into silence, but it was more comfortable now, and Hannah allowed herself to relax slightly into the rhythm of the wagon. The sun beat down mercilessly, but there was a breeze that kept the worst of the heat at bay. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals she could not see. The world out here felt ancient and indifferent, a place where human concerns mattered very little. The ranch appeared gradually, growing out of the landscape as they crested a low rise. It was larger than Hannah had expected. A sprawling operation with a main house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and a corral where horses moved restlessly in the afternoon heat. The house itself was built of adobe and wood, long and low with a wide porch that ran the length of the front. It was not fancy, but it looked solid and well-maintained, a place built to last. Henry pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake. "Welcome to the Quinn Ranch, Miss Oakes." Hannah climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the long ride, and looked around. 4 men emerged from the barn, clearly curious about the new arrival. They were dusty and weathered, ranging in age from perhaps 20 to 50, and they regarded her with the kind of respectful distance that working men showed to women they did not know. "This is Miss Oakes," Henry announced. "She will be managing the household. I expect you all to treat her with respect." The men nodded, murmuring greetings, and then returned to their work. Henry grabbed her trunk from the wagon and gestured for her to follow him into the house. The interior was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace at one end and a kitchen area at the other. Doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was covered in a fine layer of dust that spoke to Henry's claim of poor housekeeping. "Your room is through here," Henry said, leading her down a short hallway to a door on the left. The room beyond was small but adequate, with a bed, a dresser, a small table, and a window that looked out over the desert. "The washroom is at the end of the hall. I am across the main room on the other side of the house, so you will have privacy." He set her trunk down at the foot of the bed and stepped back. "Take some time to settle in. We eat dinner around 7. Nothing fancy, usually whatever the men are having, but maybe with you here, things will improve." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Hannah sat on the bed and looked around her new room. It was clean, at least, and the bed was comfortable. The window let in good light. It was more than she had hoped for, really. But as the reality of her situation settled over her, she felt the full weight of her isolation. She was miles from town, living with a man she did not know, expected to perform duties she had never learned. What had she been thinking? But there was no going back now. The store was gone. Alpine held nothing for her. This was her life now, for better or worse. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe and placing her mother's Bible on the table beside the bed. Then she washed her face in the basin on the dresser, straightened her hair, and went to explore the house. The kitchen was the disaster she had expected. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, the stove was crusted with old food, and the pantry was a jumble of supplies with no organization. Hannah rolled up her sleeves and began to work, finding a strange comfort in the familiar task of bringing order to chaos. By the time the sun began to set, she had cleaned the dishes, scrubbed the stove, and organized the pantry. It was not much, but it was a start. When the men came in for dinner, Hannah had managed to put together a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. It was nothing special, but it was edible, and the men ate with the enthusiasm of people who had been feeding themselves poorly for too long. Henry looked across the table at her and nodded. "This is good, Miss Oakes, thank you." It was a small victory, but Hannah allowed herself to feel a moment of pride. She had survived her first day. Perhaps she could survive the rest. The days began to fall into a pattern. Hannah rose with the sun, made breakfast for Henry and the ranch hands, and spent her days cleaning and organizing the house. There was more work than she had anticipated, but she found she enjoyed the physical labor, the way it left her too tired to worry at night. Henry was respectful and distant, treating her with unfailing courtesy but making no attempt to become familiar. The ranch hands were equally respectful, tipping their hats when they saw her and thanking her for meals, but otherwise leaving her to her work. 3 weeks passed before Hannah realized she had not thought about Alpine or the store in days. She was too busy learning how to bake bread in the temperamental oven, how to manage the root cellar, how to stretch supplies between the monthly trips to town. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way that standing behind a counter had never been. It was on a Saturday morning, nearly a month after her arrival, that Henry found her hanging laundry on the line behind the house. The wind was fierce, whipping the sheets and threatening to tear them from her hands, but she wrestled them into submission with stubborn determination. "Miss Oakes," Henry said, startling her. She had not heard him approach over the wind. "I wanted to talk with you about something." Hannah pinned the last sheet and turned to face him, pushing hair out of her face. "Of course, Mr. Quinn." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight in that way she had come to recognize as a sign he was working up to something. "You have been doing excellent work here. The house is in better shape than it has been in months, and the men are happier for having decent food. I wanted you to know that I appreciate it." "Thank you," Hannah said, unsure where this was leading. "But I have noticed that you never leave the immediate area of the house. You have not seen any of the ranch, have not ventured beyond the yard. I thought perhaps you might like to see more of the property, to understand the operation better." Hannah felt a flutter of something that might have been interest or might have been anxiety. "I would not want to interfere with your work." "You would not be interfering. I thought I might take you riding tomorrow, show you around. It is important that you understand where you are living, what we do here." The flutter intensified into something closer to panic. "I do not know how to ride, Mr. Quinn." Henry looked genuinely surprised. "You do not ride?" No, I spent my entire life in that store. I never learned. Something shifted in his expression, a softening she had not seen before. Then I will teach you. Everyone should know how to ride out here, Miss Oakes. It is a necessary skill and not a difficult one to learn. I am afraid of falling, Hannah said, the admission coming out before she could stop it. She felt foolish saying it, childish, but it was the truth. The horses looked so large and powerful, and she felt so small and inadequate. Henry's expression grew even softer, and he stepped closer, his eyes serious and intent on hers. I will catch you, he said simply. I promise, Miss Oakes, I will not let you fall. There was something in his voice, a certainty and a warmth that made her believe him. And beneath her fear there was a spark of something else, a desire to be brave, to learn this thing that everyone else seemed to take for granted. All right, she heard herself say. I will try. The next morning, Hannah dressed in her most practical skirt and met Henry at the corral. The ranch hands were nowhere to be seen, and she was grateful for the privacy. Making a fool of herself in front of an audience was not something she wanted to contemplate. Henry had already saddled a horse, a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes and a coat the color of honey. This is Daisy, he said, stroking the horse's neck. She is the calmest horse we have, perfect for learning. She will take care of you. Hannah approached cautiously, extending her hand the way Henry showed her. The horse's nose was soft and warm, and when Daisy huffed gently against her palm, Hannah felt some of her fear ease. First, we will just get you comfortable being around her, Henry said. Touch her, talk to her, let her know you are friendly. Horses are good judges of character, and they respond to confidence. Even if you do not feel confident, pretend you do. Daisy will believe you. Hannah spent several minutes simply standing beside the horse, running her hands over the warm coat, feeling the powerful muscles beneath. Daisy stood patiently, occasionally turning her head to regard Hannah with those calm, intelligent eyes. Good, Henry said. Now, I am going to show you how to mount. Watch me first. He demonstrated, swinging up into the saddle with an easy grace that made it look effortless. From up there, he looked natural and comfortable, as if the horse was simply an extension of himself. Your turn, he said, dismounting and gesturing to the stirrup. Put your left foot here, hold onto the saddle horn with both hands and pull yourself up while swinging your right leg over. I will be right here to steady you. Hannah took a deep breath and tried to follow his instructions. Her first attempt was clumsy, and she barely got her foot into the stirrup before losing her balance. But Henry was there, his hands on her waist, steadying her. Try again, he encouraged. You are thinking too much. Just do it in one smooth motion. On the third try, Hannah found herself suddenly in the saddle, higher up than she had expected, with the horse solid and warm beneath her. Her heart was pounding, but it was not entirely from fear. There was exhilaration mixed in, a sense of accomplishment. Excellent, Henry said, and there was genuine pride in his voice. Now just sit for a moment. Get used to how it feels. You are doing wonderfully, Miss Oakes. Hannah gripped the saddle horn with both hands, feeling the horse shift slightly beneath her. It was terrifying and thrilling at the same time, and she could not quite believe she was actually sitting on a horse. I am going to lead her around the corral, Henry said, taking hold of Daisy's bridle. Just relax and move with her. Do not fight it, just feel the rhythm. He began to walk, and Daisy moved forward with a gentle, swaying gait that made Hannah clutch harder at the saddle horn. But after a few minutes, she began to understand what Henry meant about rhythm. There was a pattern to the horse's movement, a gentle rocking that she could anticipate and move with. They circled the corral several times, Henry talking to her in a low, encouraging voice, telling her to relax her shoulders, to sit deeper in the saddle, to trust the horse. Gradually, Hannah felt some of the tension leave her body, and she began to actually enjoy the sensation of movement. "You are a natural," Henry said, looking up at her with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I knew you would be." They spent an hour in the corral, with Henry gradually letting her take more control, showing her how to use the reins to guide Daisy, how to use her legs to communicate. By the end of the lesson, Hannah was walking the horse around the corral on her own, and the sense of accomplishment was sweeter than anything she had felt in a long time. When she finally dismounted, her legs were shaking and her muscles ached in ways she had not anticipated, but she was grinning. Henry caught her as she stumbled slightly, his hand steadying her until she found her balance. "You did wonderfully," he said, and he had not let go of her arms. They stood there for a moment, close enough that Hannah could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Something passed between them, a moment of connection that made her breath catch. Then Henry stepped back, releasing her, and the moment passed. "Same time next week?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes," Hannah said. "I would like that." As she walked back to the house, her legs still unsteady, Hannah realized that for the first time since her father's death, she was looking forward to something. The fear was still there, but it was being slowly replaced by something else, something that felt like hope. The riding lessons became a regular part of their routine. Every Sunday morning, Hannah met Henry at the corral, and they spent an hour or two working with Daisy. Hannah progressed quickly, moving from nervous beginner to competent rider over the course of several weeks. With each lesson, she felt herself growing braver, more confident, not just in riding but in life. And with each lesson, she found herself increasingly aware of Henry. The way he smiled when she did something right, the warmth in his voice when he encouraged her, the strength in his hands when he helped her mount or caught her when she stumbled. She told herself it was simple gratitude, appreciation for his kindness and patience. But late at night, lying in her small bed and listening to the desert wind, she knew it was more than that. It was October when Henry finally took her out beyond the ranch yard. They rode side by side, Hannah on Daisy and Henry on his big bay gelding, out into the open country. The air was cooler now, with a crispness that promised winter, and the desert was beautiful in shades of gold and brown and purple. "This is my favorite time of year," Henry said as they rode. "Everything is settling down after the heat of summer, getting ready to rest through winter. There is a peace to it." They rode for an hour, Henry pointing out landmarks and boundaries, showing her the full extent of his ranch. It was larger than she had realized, thousands of acres stretching out in all directions. They saw cattle grazing in the distance, and once a small herd of pronghorn that bounded away at their approach. Finally, Henry led her to a small canyon where a spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a rare pool of clear water. Cottonwood trees grew around the spring, their leaves golden in the autumn sun, and the whole place felt like a hidden oasis in the harsh desert. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Henry said, dismounting and helping Hannah down from her horse. "I come here when I need to think." They sat on the rocks beside the spring, and Hannah trailed her fingers in the cool water. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer awkward or strained. She had grown used to his presence, to the quiet strength he radiated. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Quinn?" Hannah said eventually. "Henry, please, I think we have moved beyond formalities, do you not?" Hannah felt a flush of pleasure at the informality. "Henry, then, and you should call me Hannah." "Hannah," he said, as if testing the name. "What did you want to ask? Why did you never marry?" A successful rancher, a good man. Surely there were women interested. Henry was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the water. "I suppose I was waiting for the right person," he said finally. Someone who saw this place the way I do, who could love it the way I do. Someone who wanted to build something lasting. And you never found her. I thought I had not. He turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made Hannah's heart beat faster. But maybe I was just not looking in the right place. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Hannah knew she should look away, should break the moment, but she found she could not. Something was shifting between them, had been shifting for weeks now, and she was no longer sure she wanted to stop it. "Hannah," Henry said quietly, and just the way he said her name made something in her chest tighten. "I know this is not what you signed on for when you came here. You needed employment, a safe place, and I have tried to respect that, but I need to be honest with you. These past months, getting to know you, watching you adapt and grow and find your place here, I have come to care for you as more than just an employee." Hannah's breath caught. She had not been imagining it then, the growing warmth between them, the moments when their eyes met and held just a bit too long. "I care for you too," she admitted, the words coming easier than she expected. "I have been trying not to, trying to maintain proper distance, but I cannot seem to help it." Henry reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Then maybe we should stop trying. Maybe we should see where this goes if you are willing." "I am willing," Hannah said, and felt as if she was stepping off a cliff into empty air. But this time, she was not afraid of falling because she knew Henry would catch her. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Hannah felt something in her chest bloom open, like a flower unfurling toward the sun. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Well," Henry said, a hint of laughter in his voice, "I suppose this changes things." "I suppose it does," Hannah agreed. They rode back to the ranch in the golden afternoon light, and everything looked different to Hannah now. This was not just a place where she worked, not just a safe haven from destitution. This was home, or at least it could be. And Henry was not just her employer, not just a kind man who had helped her when she needed it. He was someone she could build a life with, someone who made her want to be brave. The transformation in their relationship was gradual but undeniable. Henry began taking his meals at the house rather than with the ranch hands, and they spent their evenings talking by the fire, sharing stories about their pasts and dreams for the future. Hannah learned that Henry had come to Texas from Virginia after the war, looking for a fresh start in a place where the old conflicts meant less. He had worked as a cowhand for years, saving every penny until he had enough to buy the ranch. It had been his entire focus for 5 years, building something lasting and good. "I never wanted just a successful business," he told her one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and red. "I wanted a home, a place where family could grow and thrive, but I was beginning to think that was a dream that would never come true." "And now?" Hannah asked, leaning into his shoulder. "Now I have hope," he said simply, wrapping his arm around her. The ranch hands noticed the change in their relationship, of course, but they were respectful about it. Old Jack, the foreman who had been working ranches since before Hannah was born, even offered his congratulations. "About time the boss found himself a good woman," he said with a gap-toothed grin. "This place needs a lady's touch permanent like." Winter came to the high desert, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. Hannah learned to manage the big stove in the main room, keeping the house warm and comfortable. She learned to cook the hearty meals that working men needed, to preserve food for the lean months, to manage the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch household running smoothly. And through it all, her relationship with Henry deepened and grew. He was courting her properly, she realized, despite the unusual circumstances of them already living under the same roof. He brought her small gifts from town, a new shawl, a book of poetry, ribbons for her hair. He never presumed on her affection, never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He was patient and kind and steady, everything she had never known she needed. It was Christmas Eve when Henry asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the fire, the ranch hands having all ridden into town for the holiday celebration, leaving them alone for the evening. Snow was falling outside, a rare heavy snow that transformed the desert into something magical and strange. "Hannah," Henry said, taking her hand. "I know we have only been courting for a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength and your determination and the way you have made this house into a home. I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, clearly old but beautiful in its simplicity. "This was my mother's ring. It is all I have of her. I would be honored if you would wear it." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Henry, I will marry you. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her, and when Henry kissed her, she felt as if everything in her life had been leading to this moment. All the fear and uncertainty and grief had been worth it to bring her here, to this man, to this life. They were married in Alpine on New Year's Day of 1886, with Reverend Thomas officiating and half the town in attendance. Hannah wore a new dress of deep blue that Henry had bought for her, and she had never felt more beautiful. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when Henry slipped a second ring onto her finger beside the first, she knew she was beginning the life she was meant to live. The celebration afterward at the boarding house was loud and joyful, with food and music and dancing that went on late into the night. But eventually, Henry and Hannah slipped away, riding back to the ranch in the cold, clear night with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. The house was warm when they arrived, Jack having kept the fires going while they were gone. Hannah felt a flutter of nervousness as Henry helped her down from the wagon, but when he took her hand and led her inside, his touch was gentle and reassuring. "Are you nervous?" he asked as they stood in the main room, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. "A little," Hannah admitted, "but in a good way. I trust you, Henry." "I will always take care of you," he promised. "Always, Hannah. You never have to be afraid of falling because I will always catch you." It was the same promise he had made months ago when she was afraid to climb onto a horse for the first time, but now it meant so much more. It was a promise for a lifetime, a commitment to face whatever came together. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, and Hannah fell asleep in her husband's arms feeling more safe and loved than she ever had in her life. The winter passed peacefully, with Hannah settling fully into her role as Henry's wife and the mistress of the ranch. The ranch hands now answered to her on household matters, and she found she enjoyed the responsibility and respect that came with her new position. She was no longer just an employee or even just a guest. She belonged here. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle began calving, and Henry was busy from dawn to dusk managing the operation. Hannah helped where she could, learning yet another new skill as she assisted with the easier births and cared for orphaned calves. There was something deeply satisfying about nurturing new life, about seeing the tangible results of their hard work. It was in April, as the desert bloomed briefly with wildflowers, that Hannah realized she was carrying a child. The realization came gradually, small signs that she first dismissed, but that eventually added up to an unavoidable conclusion. She was both terrified and thrilled, unsure how to tell Henry but bursting with the need to share the news. She waited until evening, until they were sitting together on the porch watching the sunset as had become their habit. "Henry," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, concern flickering across his face at her serious tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is right." She smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes again. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Henry just stared at her as if he could not quite process what she had said. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she was the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Hannah, truly, truly. I think it will be sometime in November." Henry pulled back to look at her face, his eyes bright with emotion. "You have just made me the happiest man in Texas, in the whole country. A baby. Our baby." They sat together as the sun set, planning and dreaming about the future. Henry was adamant that Hannah should do nothing strenuous, that she should rest and take care of herself. Hannah laughed at his overprotectiveness, but was touched by his concern. "I am not made of glass, Henry. Women have been having babies while working for all of human history." "Not my wife," Henry said firmly. "Not if I can help it. I will hire someone to help with the heavier work. You focus on taking care of yourself and our child." True to his word, Henry brought on a girl from town, a young woman named Sarah who was happy to help with the cooking and cleaning. Hannah found she enjoyed having another woman around, someone to talk to during the long days when Henry was out working the ranch. The summer heat was oppressive as Hannah's pregnancy advanced, but she tried not to complain. Henry was so attentive and worried that she did not want to add to his concerns. He had taken to checking on her constantly, finding excuses to come back to the house throughout the day just to make sure she was all right. "You are going to drive yourself crazy," Hannah told him one particularly hot afternoon when he appeared for the third time before noon. "I am fine, Henry. The baby is fine. You need to focus on your work." "My work can wait. You are what is important." Hannah crossed the room and took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "We are both important, the ranch and us. You have worked too hard building this place to let it suffer now. I promise I will tell you if anything is wrong, but you have to trust me to take care of myself." Henry sighed but nodded. "You are right. I know you are right. I am just so worried I could not bear it if something happened to you." "Nothing is going to happen to me. I am strong, Henry, you know that." As the months passed, and autumn came again to the desert, Hannah felt the baby growing stronger inside her. She loved the feeling of movement, the little kicks and rolls that told her the child was healthy and active. Henry would place his hand on her belly in the evenings, marveling at every movement, talking to the baby in a soft voice that made Hannah's heart melt. "Do you think it is a boy or a girl?" he asked one night. "I do not know. Does it matter to you? Not even a little bit." "As long as the baby is healthy and you are safe, I do not care at all." The baby came on a cold November night, 3 days after their first wedding anniversary. Hannah's labor started in the late afternoon, and by the time they got the midwife from town, it was full dark and the contractions were coming hard and fast. Henry wanted to stay with her, but the midwife, a stern woman named Mrs. Cooper, shooed him out of the room. "This is women's work," she said firmly. "You can pace and worry outside." The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Hannah wondered if she had the strength to continue. But she thought about Henry waiting outside, about the life they had built together, about the baby who would soon be part of their family, and she found reserves of strength she did not know she possessed. It was near dawn when she finally heard the strong, angry cry of a newborn, and Mrs. Cooper was smiling as she wrapped the baby in a clean blanket. "You have a son, Mrs. Quinn. A big, healthy boy." Hannah held her son for the first time, looking down at the tiny, red face, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known possible. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with a fuzz of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "Can my husband come in now?" Hannah asked, unable to take her eyes off the baby. Mrs. Cooper opened the door and Henry practically fell into the room, his face haggard with worry. But when he saw Hannah sitting up in bed, holding their son, his expression transformed into pure joy. "A boy," Hannah said softly. "We have a son, Henry." Henry approached almost reverently, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and looking down at the baby with wonder. "He is beautiful." "You are both beautiful. Hannah, I do not even have words." "Hold him," Hannah said, carefully transferring the baby into Henry's arms. Henry held his son with the same careful competence he brought to everything, supporting the tiny head and cradling the small body against his chest. The baby quieted at his father's touch, and Henry looked at Hannah with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." They named the baby James after Henry's father, and he became the center of their world. The ranch hands doted on the baby, taking turns stopping by the house to see him and offering unsolicited advice on child rearing. Old Jack carved a beautiful cradle from juniper wood, and even the usually taciturn younger hands seemed to soften around the infant. Hannah had never been happier. She spent her days caring for James, marveling at every small change and development. Henry was a devoted father, taking every opportunity to hold and play with his son. The house rang with laughter and joy in a way it never had before. As James grew from infant to toddler, Hannah watched him become a perfect blend of both his parents. He had Henry's dark hair and serious eyes, but Hannah's smile and stubborn determination. He was fearless in the way of small children, and Hannah found herself constantly chasing after him as he explored the ranch with boundless curiosity. When James was 2 years old, Hannah found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and she delivered a daughter in the spring of 1889. They named her Margaret after Hannah's mother, but from the beginning, she was Maggie to everyone. Maggie was different from James, quieter and more observant, content to sit and watch the world rather than charging into it. She had Hannah's auburn hair and Henry's warm brown eyes, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. "We are building something wonderful here," Henry said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching James chase chickens in the yard while baby Maggie slept peacefully in Hannah's arms. "A family, a legacy. Sometimes I cannot believe how lucky I am." "We are both lucky," Hannah said, leaning into his shoulder. "I cannot imagine my life any other way now. When I think about how lost and afraid I was when we met, how uncertain everything seemed, it feels like a different lifetime." "You were never lost," Henry said softly. "You just had not found your way home yet." The years rolled on in a pattern of work and joy and the everyday challenges of ranch life. James grew into a serious, responsible boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the business of ranching from an early age. Maggie was quieter but just as determined, with a gentle way with the animals that reminded Hannah of Henry. When James was 8 and Maggie was 6, Hannah gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas. Tommy, as he quickly became known, was the most boisterous of their children, always laughing, always moving, bringing chaos and joy wherever he went. The ranch prospered under Henry's careful management. They added more land, increased the herd, built a new barn and additional outbuildings. Henry hired more hands as the operation grew, and Hannah managed an increasingly complex household with the same competence she had brought to everything since arriving at the ranch all those years ago. But it was not all easy. There were hard winters when they lost cattle, dry summers when the springs ran low, and the constant worry that came with depending on the land for survival. There were times when money was tight, when they had to make difficult decisions about where to spend their limited resources. Through it all, Hannah and Henry faced everything together. They had built not just a successful ranch but a true partnership, each supporting the other through challenges and celebrating victories together. The love that had started tentatively that day at the spring had grown into something deep and unshakable, a foundation that held firm through everything life threw at them. Hannah sometimes rode out to the spring, the place where Henry had first told her he cared for her, and marveled at the twisting path that had brought her to this life. If someone had told that frightened, grieving girl standing over her father's grave that she would find not just security but joy, not just safety but love, she would not have believed them. But it had happened. Against all odds, in this harsh and beautiful place, she had found home. James was 15, Maggie 13, and Tommy 7 when Henry's health began to fail. It started small, a persistent cough that would not go away, increasing fatigue. Hannah tried not to worry, told herself it was just age catching up with him, but she saw the concern in Dr. Morrison's face when he came out from Alpine to examine Henry. "His lungs are damaged," the doctor said quietly, away from where Henry could hear. "Probably from years of breathing dust on the trail when he was younger. There is not much we can do except keep him comfortable and make sure he does not overexert himself." "How long?" Hannah asked, her throat tight with fear. "Hard to say. Could be years, could be less. He needs to take it easier, let others do more of the physical work." Henry did not take the diagnosis well. "I am not an invalid," he insisted when Hannah tried to get him to rest more. "I have a ranch to run, a family to provide for. I cannot just sit around doing nothing." "You are not doing nothing. You are managing and directing. Let the hands do more of the physical work. Let James take on more responsibility. He is ready, Henry, you know he is." Reluctantly, Henry began to delegate more, though it clearly frustrated him. James rose to the challenge, proving himself capable and responsible beyond his years. Maggie took on more of the household management, working alongside Hannah to keep everything running smoothly. Even young Tommy did his part, handling small chores with the seriousness of someone twice his age. For 2 more years, they managed well. Henry's condition was stable, and while he could not do as much as he once had, he was still very much the head of the family and the ranch. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, welcomed the arrival of Maggie's first suitor with good humor, and watched with pride as James grew into a man. It was a peaceful afternoon in April of 1898 when Henry's condition took a sudden turn. He had been sitting on the porch with Hannah, watching the sunset as they had done 1,000 times before, when he began coughing. This time the cough did not stop, and Hannah saw blood on the handkerchief he pressed to his mouth. Dr. Morrison came quickly, but there was nothing he could do. Henry's lungs were failing, and it was only a matter of time. The doctor left medicine for the pain and told Hannah to keep Henry comfortable. The rest was in God's hands. Henry lasted 3 more weeks, long enough to say goodbye to each of his children, to see to the ranch's immediate affairs, to tell Hannah everything he needed her to know about managing the property and the business. He faced death with the same quiet strength he had brought to everything in life, more concerned about his family than about himself. "Promise me you will be all right," he said to Hannah one night as she sat beside his bed, holding his hand. "Promise me you will keep the ranch going, raise our children to be good people, live a full life." "I promise," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "But you have to promise me something too. Promise me you will wait for me wherever you are going. Promise me this is not really goodbye." "Never goodbye," Henry said, his voice weak but certain. "Just see you later. I will be waiting, Hannah. However long it takes, I will be waiting." He died on a warm May morning with Hannah holding his hand and his children gathered around his bed. He was 52 years old, and he had lived a good life, but it still felt far too short. They buried him on the ranch, on a small rise overlooking the spring that had been his favorite place. Hannah stood at the graveside with her 3 children around her and felt as if part of her heart had been buried along with him. But even in her grief, she knew she would survive this. Henry had taught her to be strong, to face her fears, to know that she could handle whatever life brought. And more than that, he had given her a family, a home, a purpose. She owed it to him and to their children to keep going, to honor his memory by living fully and well. James, at 17, stepped up to run the ranch with a maturity that would have made his father proud. Maggie, at 15, managed the household and took care of Tommy with quiet competence. And Hannah, who had once been so afraid of falling, found that she could stand steady even when her world had been shaken to its foundations. The years after Henry's death were hard, but they were also full of life. James grew into a fine rancher, eventually marrying a sweet girl from Alpine and bringing her home to the ranch. Maggie surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher, and Hannah supported her daughter's education, watching with pride as Maggie opened a small school in Alpine. Tommy, true to his boisterous nature, joined the cavalry as soon as he was old enough, writing long letters home about his adventures that made Hannah laugh and worry in equal measure. And Hannah kept the ranch running, proving herself to be as capable a manager as Henry had been. She made decisions about stock and land, dealt with buyers and banks, and ensured that the legacy Henry had built continued to thrive. The ranch hands respected her, the community respected her, and most importantly, she respected herself. She never remarried. Some widows did, and she would not have judged anyone for seeking companionship. But for Hannah, there had only ever been Henry. He had been her first and only love, the man who had caught her when she was falling and taught her to fly. On warm evenings, Hannah would ride out to the spring, to the place where Henry had first told her he cared for her, and she would sit by the water and talk to him. She told him about their children and eventually about their grandchildren. She told him about the ranch, about changes and challenges and victories. And she felt his presence there, warm and steady, just as it had been in life. James and his wife had 4 children who filled the ranch house with laughter again. Maggie married a fellow teacher and had 2 daughters who visited often from Alpine. Tommy eventually settled down, marrying late but happily, and adding 3 more grandchildren to the family. Hannah lived to see her grandchildren grow, to watch the ranch continue to prosper under James's management, to know that what she and Henry had built would last beyond their lifetimes. She lived long enough to see the new century dawn, to watch the world change in ways both wonderful and troubling. She was 82 years old when she passed away peacefully in her sleep, one autumn night, 60 years almost to the day after she had first arrived at the ranch as a frightened, grieving young woman with nowhere else to go. Her children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, along with half the population of Alpine, to honor a woman who had become a pillar of the community. They buried her beside Henry on the rise overlooking the spring, and if her tombstone listed her as a devoted wife, mother, and grandmother, those who knew her best understood that she had been so much more. She had been a survivor, a pioneer, a woman who had taken fear and loss and transformed them into strength and legacy. On her tombstone, beneath her name and dates, James had carved a simple inscription that captured everything important about his parents' love story. He taught her to ride. He promised to catch her. He kept his promise forever. The ranch continued through the generations, each inheritor adding their own chapter to the story, but always remembering the foundation laid by Henry and Hannah Quinn. The spring remained a special place, cared for and protected, where family gathered for important moments and quiet reflection. And sometimes, on warm evenings when the desert was painted gold by the setting sun, people swore they could see two figures sitting by the water, close together, talking quietly like old friends who had all the time in the world. Just a trick of the light, of course, shadows and wish fulfillment. But those who believed in love that transcended death, in promises kept beyond the grave, liked to think otherwise. The story of Hannah and Henry became family legend, passed down through the generations as an example of what real love looked like. Not the easy kind that flourished without challenge, but the kind that grew stronger through adversity, that transformed fear into courage and loneliness into belonging. Their great-great-grandchildren, tending the ranch well into the 20th century, knew the stories by heart. How their great-great-grandmother had arrived with nothing but a trunk and a broken heart. How their great-great-grandfather had offered her not just employment, but a chance at a new life. How he had taught her to ride, promising to catch her if she fell, and how that promise had become the foundation of everything they built together. It was a love story that belonged to the Old West, to a time when life was hard and survival uncertain, when a man's word was his bond, and a woman's courage could reshape her destiny. But it was also a timeless story, because love and trust and partnership never go out of style. In the small cemetery on the rise overlooking the spring, two headstones stood side by side, weathered by wind and time but still legible. Henry Quentin Quinn, 1846–1898, and Hannah Marie Quinn, 1863–1945. And carved in the stone between them, words that told their entire story in a single sentence. He promised to catch her, and he always did. The ranch that had been born from Henry's dreams and built by their combined efforts stood strong, a testament to what could be achieved when two people trusted each other completely. The house where Hannah had learned to cook and keep a household, where she had raised 3 children and welcomed grandchildren, still stood on its original foundation, expanded and modernized but essentially unchanged. The corral where Hannah had taken her first terrified seat on a horse was still there, though new generations of children learned to ride there now. The spring where Henry had first spoken of love flowed as clear and pure as it had a century before, a constant in a changing world. And in the family, passed down from mother to daughter, from father to son, was an understanding of what it meant to catch someone when they fell, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. To be the person someone could trust absolutely, could depend on completely, could build a life within confidence. Hannah had arrived at the Quinn ranch afraid of falling, and Henry had promised to catch her. But what they built together was so much more than one moment of trust. It was a lifetime of catching each other, of being there when things were hard, of celebrating together when things were good. It was partnership in its truest form, love in its deepest expression. Their story became the standard against which future generations measured their own relationships. When James gave advice to his son about choosing a wife, he talked about how his mother had transformed from a frightened girl into a strong woman because his father had believed in her. When Maggie talked to her daughters about love, she spoke of her parents' devotion, the way they had faced everything together, the strength they drew from their bond. And when Tommy, the youngest, the one who had been only 9 when his father died, told stories to his grandchildren. He always included the riding lessons. He would describe how his mother, who became one of the finest horsewomen in the county, had once been terrified to even approach a horse. How his father had patiently taught her, had promised to keep her safe, and how that promise had extended far beyond riding lessons into every aspect of their lives together. "That is what love is," Tommy would say, his voice still carrying the warmth and enthusiasm that had defined him all his life. "It is promising to catch someone when they fall, and then spending your whole life keeping that promise." The story spread beyond the family, becoming part of the folklore of Alpine and the surrounding ranch country. People told it at weddings, using it as an example of what marriage should be. Teachers told it in schools when talking about the pioneer days, about the men and women who built communities in the harsh desert. Historians included it in books about the settling of West Texas, one small story among thousands, but somehow more memorable than most. Because it was not really about the Old West, not really. It was about something universal and timeless. It was about taking a chance on someone when they were at their lowest. It was about seeing potential where others saw only problems. It was about patience and kindness and the transformative power of genuine love. Hannah had been afraid of falling, but Henry had caught her. And in doing so, he had given her wings. As the sun set over the Quinn ranch on any given evening, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple and red, it was easy to imagine you could feel their presence there. In the warm wind that rustled the cottonwood trees by the spring, in the patient nicker of horses in the corral, in the solid walls of the house that had sheltered generations, in the very earth itself, nourished by their labor and love. Their story had ended as all stories must, but what they had built lived on. Not just the physical ranch, though that remained a thriving operation, but the example they had set, the standard they had established for what love and partnership could be. They had started as an employer and employee, two people brought together by circumstance and necessity. But they had become so much more. They had become partners in the truest sense, building a life and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And somewhere, beyond the veil that separates this world from the next, perhaps Hannah and Henry were still together. Perhaps they sat by that eternal spring, hand in hand, watching over their descendants with pride and love. Perhaps Henry still caught Hannah when she stumbled, and perhaps she still smiled at him the way she had all those years ago when he first promised to keep her safe. It was a beautiful thought, and one that their descendants liked to believe. Because if love like theirs could transcend death, if promises made with the whole heart could echo through eternity, then there was hope for all of us. Hope that our best moments define us more than our worst. Hope that courage can grow from fear. Hope that love, real love, can transform everything it touches. The Quinn Ranch stood under the vast Texas sky, a monument to two people who had trusted each other enough to build something lasting. And on warm spring mornings, when the desert bloomed briefly with wildflowers and the air was sweet with possibility, you could almost hear Hannah's laughter floating on the breeze and Henry's deep voice promising, as he had so many years ago, "I will catch you." And he had. Oh, how he had. Not just once, not just in that moment when she was afraid to climb on a horse, but every day of their lives together. Through grief and fear and uncertainty. Through joy and triumph and ordinary moments that somehow became extraordinary because they faced them together. That was their legacy. More enduring than land or cattle or even the strong house that still stood firm against the desert wind. They left behind proof that love, real love, could be a foundation strong enough to build a life on. That trust, once given and honored, could create something beautiful and lasting. And so the story of Hannah and Henry Quinn lived on, passed down through generations, told and retold until it became less history and more legend. But unlike most legends, this one had the virtue of being entirely true. Every word, every moment, every promise made and kept, a cowboy had offered to teach her to ride. She had said she was afraid of falling. He had said he would catch her. And he had kept that promise, faithfully and completely, for the rest of their days and beyond into eternity.